Eminem, a.k.a. Slim Shady, a.k.a. Marshall Bruce Mathers III. He is a survivor, rap star, father, actor, felon, media mogul, the voice of a generation. He has emerged as rap's most controversial performer and storyteller, an artist whose provocative imagery and dark rhymes have resonated with America's increasingly disenfranchised youth, and whose multiple personas have enchanted and hypnotized audiences worldwide. Born into a broken home, he has drawn deeply from the well of his own life, which provides the fuel for his vision and artistic will. His lyrics are his life, his legend, his alter ego, and his therapy. To understand his music, we must first understand his life and the world he grew up in.
I was born in Highland, Kansas, and my mother left my father when I was probably about 9 months old and brought me to St. Joseph, Missouri, and left me with my abusive alcoholic grandmother.
St. Joseph's, Missouri is a quiet working-class town. It is a town Marshall's grandmother Betty grew up in, a town his mother Debbie grew up in. A place tarnished with the effects of alcoholism, abuse, and instability. The challenges in Marshall's family life would be set in motion long before his birth. The residual effects of generations of abuse was passed on by his great-grandmother even as she lay dying.
She died a hell of a death at 93, and I was so glad. And she called for me on her deathbed, and I told her, I said, you know, I'm glad you're dying. And she says, can you forgive me? And I says, no, I can't forgive you. The way you beat and abused a little child, an innocent child. I said, you know, you're going to hell, don't you? And she looked up at me, and I said, God help you.
Despite the years of abuse, Betty dreamt of a better life.
Well, as a young girl, I wanted to just be a mother. I wanted a great big family, you know. I was going to have this house with a white picket fence, like everybody has, women. And I was just going to be so good to my children, bake for them, and, you know, just love them to death. But when everything went wrong, and I married Mr. Nelson, I was 14.
Soon after a young marriage, Betty gave birth to the first of several children, Debbie, Marshall's mother.
Oh, Debbie was so tiny, I was embarrassed. Being so young, I had a hard labor, and my daughter weighed probably about 4 pounds.
If you were to do a drawing of the Mathers-Nelson family relations are like, we look like cats in a bag. This is a clan. It's hard scrabble, country folk who are close to each other, except when they're fighting each other.
She could not wait to have a baby brother.
Not long after her baby brother arrived, Betty realized Debbie was unwilling to share the attention of her mother.
Put him down for a nap one time, so I walked into the bedroom, and she's got her father's wrench, big wrench, just about to hit him in the head. I had to watch Debbie from then on, continuously.
Betty's marriage ended, and the children had a succession of would-be stepfathers.
I cannot remember a time ever when there was not a man in the house. I never really got close to my stepdads. They were pretty much alcoholics.
There was a lot of drama, you know, growing up in our family. There was a lot of police called.
I was sexually assaulted by my one stepdad when I was 12. He didn't get the job complete because he was arrested. I remember my mother coming home and the police taking him out and her telling me, you better hope I can get him out of jail. I don't believe you. And I ran away. It's like, I'm not facing him if you get him out of jail. I'm not telling him I'm sorry because I'm not sorry because of something he did.
She wanted to get out of the house so bad. Debbie just was tired.
Debbie searched for a way out. One day she thought she finally found it in a quiet boy who lived on her block and played in a local band, Marshall Bruce Mathers II.
I met Bruce, and he was my knight in shining armor, not even when I was 14.
Debbie comes in from school, she says, Bruce and I are getting married. Tell her, Bruce. Yeah, he says, I love Debbie, and Debbie loves me, and we're getting married.
Debbie and Marshall Bruce Mathers II were married in 1970. a marriage Debbie hoped would take her away from the troubles of home.
It wasn't that I didn't want to be around my brothers and sisters anymore. It's just I wanted my own life. I wanted my own child. And I wanted to get away from all that.
And next thing I know, she finally got pregnant. I was pregnant with Ronnie when she got pregnant.
On October 17, 1972, Debbie gave birth to Marshall Bruce Mathers III.
We were just in heaven. I mean, it's like, this is a child, you know, that's going to have everything. He's not going to want for anything. He's going to be so sheltered, so loved, so protected. He's going to be the best mother in the world. And I made a promise with God. Alcohol, the drugs, the drinking, the pot, any of that stuff, they would never go through that. The fighting, none of it.
Finally happy with her own family, Debbie left for North Dakota, where Bruce would take over his father's job in a hotel. The couple made their home in the basement of Bruce's parents' house.
Debbie said that things began to get bad. She'd go down to the coffee shop or the hotel, and Bruce would be playing around with the girls. Naturally, she'd be jealous. He'd tell her to take the kid and go home. She had a lot of lonely time on her hands. And then he began to beat the heck out of her.
Marshall Bruce Mathers II was a knife thrower. He threw knives. He used to always like to see how close he could get to your foot without hitting it.
And I remember her calling me and saying that she's coming home.
She left on a train when he was maybe 1 or 2 years old, and she says he took the clothes he was wearing, they got on a train, they headed for St. Joe. And I think that was sort of the beginning of what was going to be many, many moves throughout his life.
Debbie, running again from abuse and the effects of alcoholism, left Bruce and returned home to St. Joseph with Marshall.
His dad never wanted anything to do with him. Marshall tried to contact him. Debbie tried to contact him.
He went to California and never was seen again.
Bruce Mathers then disappeared from his son's life forever. Like Betty, his grandmother, and Debbie, his mother, Marshall now was caught in the same cycle of parental abandonment. Marshall would never know his father, but he would never forget him.
When we first left his dad and moved back to Missouri, I lived in a one-room efficiency apartment.
Debbie tried to make ends meet, bouncing from job to job and house to house, always trying to make a better life for her child, not realizing the effects such constant change would have on him. Debbie and Marshall moved back and forth from St. Joseph, Missouri to the Detroit area as many as 20 times in his childhood.
We did move around a lot, but it was always to better ourselves because I could not stay with my birth mother at all. I mean, we were there a couple of days, and that was like an eternity. And every time it would be like I'd rent a house, they'd sell it right out from under me.
Debbie may have tried her best, and most parents do. Trying your best, though, doesn't mean that that's exactly what your child needs.
Soon, Debbie and her mother began to clash on how to raise Marshall.
I don't think he was an angry child. I think he just got his feelings hurt a lot. And I think his mother controlled him a lot.
He was a very big mama's boy. Marshall was a loner. He did not really want to get out and play with other kids. I had to kind of coax him. He wanted to be with Mommy all the time.
He never could speak up for himself, but he'd just go pout and go color his color books, you know, or go get on his beanbag and just watch TV, kind of like a whipped puppy in a corner, you know, just go back to my corner.
He had a disruption in attachment early on in that his father left him.
There are people like his Uncle Todd who may be the closest to a consistent father figure.
You know, I was their protector, you know, and I would take him fishing, or try to teach him what a man was supposed to be. I'd get on him about homosexuality to make sure he knew that, you know, boys go with girls and, you know, vice versa, and, you know, things like that.
They moved around a lot, so he didn't have a lot of stability. So those are some of the early things that may have begun to make him think, is the world a trustworthy place? Is it okay?
In the middle of the chaos, young Marshall began to find expression in music.
Marshall was surrounded 24/7 with music. While he was in my stomach, I was saying to him, you know, and take the speakers and put all through the house and the rooms. He just always sit against the wall and just be like he hummed himself and just bounce back and forth.
Constantly. Bounce off the backseat of the car, the couch. If there's music playing, he did this.
The teachers would tell me, this kid is retarded. You know, he's bouncing in his bounce. He has to sit still.
He'd go like this all the time. He's real hyper. And I had to have him on Ritalin. And he'd keep going like this and keep going like this.
He bounced off the back of the seat the first 8 years of his life. Rocked to the music.
Growing older, Marshall would find escape in the fantastical world of superheroes and comic books.
He was wanting to act out cartoon characters. And so I would let him.
You could open the door in his room, and he'd have Castle Grayskull going. Okay, he'd have his cartoons on, he'd have whatever he wanted, but he entertained himself a lot. He was all he had for years. He liked it that way. I mean, you know, he played with friends, but he liked, you know, entertaining himself and creating his own little world.
He was into Batman, and he was Batman. So everywhere we went with him, he had to wear that outfit. You know, most kids, they'll go, yeah, Batman, and jump off of something, but he had the lines down, he had the moves down.
A lot of times kids, when they feel like their external world is impoverished or they feel neglected, they need to feel big and powerful and strong. And they can feel big and powerful and strong by associating with X-Man, by associating with Batman and Superman, because they have superpowers then. So it really helps them feel like, okay, maybe I'm not so small, maybe I'm not being as abused as much, maybe the world can be okay because I can be He-Man.
Marshall's blossoming artistic abilities provided a quiet retreat from the chaos of his surroundings.
Marshall loved to draw. They'd get into a lot of arguments and squabbles with teachers saying he did not draw this free-handed. So I would say to them, okay, well, let's have him draw something. Sit down and draw, tell him what you'd like him to draw. Because he could draw anything.
Debbie and Marshall continued to move with Marshall changing schools as often as every 2 or 3 months.
He was always the new kid, and if he did return to some place he'd been before, he was usually behind, and so those kids didn't know him from before, so he was always starting over somewhere. He talks a lot about this nomadic upbringing in his music, this sort of peripatetic life where he's jumping from one place to the other.
Ronnie, Betty's son, Debbie's brother, was only 2 months older than Marshall. While Betty and Debbie clashed on how to raise them, the two boys would continually bond.
Their little carriers sit side by side, and they'd make their little baby talk, goos, you know, and there was a bonding already there.
When they were together, you should have seen them. I mean, you couldn't really tell the two apart. And they both had the same color hair, about the same height, and when they talk, they sound, you know, just about the same.
I encouraged them, too, to laugh and dance and be happy. The two of them are quite a team.
Did not want my mother around Marshall, and that was just me. I had to be there. And Marshall had been told so many lies. I didn't trust her around him, and the dysfunction, the yelling, the screaming, the fighting, the drinking that my stepdads could have been doing, I didn't want him subjected to it.
We didn't get too much time together as we started getting older. Debbie, we kept pulling Marshall to Michigan and Ronnie to Missouri.
As Marshall approached the end of his grade school years, Debbie and Marshall would settle permanently in the Detroit area, a city still reeling from the race riots and major destruction only a few years earlier.
There were a lot of tensions at that time, a lot of racial tension. The city was in such chaos that the National Guard was mobilized.
In the streets of Detroit, a racial war zone had been created by the '67 riots. Marshall would find himself in the middle of all of it. They always lived in neighborhoods barely a step above the ghetto. And in Detroit, Marshall consistently found himself one of the few white kids in predominantly black schools.
The neighborhood that Eminem grew up in is particularly interesting because there are still houses there and people still live in them, but they're just across the street from the suburbs. What you end up with there is a neighborhood where people have sort of filled in the gaps. It's almost like hermit crabs. You know, they found a shell that suited them, they could afford, they moved in there, and they finally became homeowners. And just across the street, not too far away from there, the people who moved out